Imagine this. You've just finished a grueling 12-hour overnight flight across the Atlantic, the kind that erases the line between night and day. You've handled turbulence, cranky passengers, endless paperwork, and the kind of exhaustion that seeps into your bones. All you want now is a quiet seat, maybe a strong cup of coffee, and a few hours of rest before your next assignment. But instead of heading to a hotel room, your schedule says you're deadheading, flying as a passenger on another route so you can pilot a later flight. Thankfully, the airline booked you a first-class seat to make sure you can recharge. So, you board, slide into that wide leather seat in 2A, and for the first time in hours, your shoulders drop. You finally let yourself breathe. The hum of the engines, the soft lighting, the faint scent of coffee, it all feels like peace, until a shadow falls over you. No greeting. No smile, just a sharp voice cutting through the calm. "You're in my seat." That was my first encounter with Karen. I looked up, surprised but polite. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but this is 2A. That's what's printed on my ticket." I even held up my boarding pass just to be sure. Karen's eyes narrowed. She gave me that up-and-down look, the kind that says you don't belong here. "Well," she sniffed, "maybe you printed the wrong ticket. People like you don't usually sit up here." I wish I could say I was shocked. But her tone said it all. She wasn't questioning the seat. She was questioning me. Maybe it was the uniform jacket folded neatly on my carry-on. Maybe it was my tired expression after an overnight shift. Whatever it was, Karen had decided I didn't fit her version of first class. Before I could respond, she waved down a passing flight attendant. Her voice rose, loud enough for half the cabin to hear. "This man is in my seat. Could you please handle this? He's clearly made a mistake." Heads turned. A few passengers gave me sympathetic glances. Others just looked entertained, like they'd just found themselves front row at a live reality show. I handed the flight attendant my boarding pass. She scanned it, then checked Karen's. "Sir is in the correct seat, ma'am. Your assigned seat is 5C. Karen's jaw dropped. For a second, I thought that might be the end of it. But she wasn't the type to admit she was wrong. "Well, that can't be right," she protested. "I always book 2A. You must have changed my seat without asking." At that moment, I had two choices. Let the attendant deal with it, or stay quiet and see how far she'd go. I chose the latter. Because what Karen didn't know was that I wasn't just a passenger. I was a pilot for this very airline. And if things went far enough, the crew she was yelling at might have to call me for help. Karen, of course, didn't take the hint. The calmer I stayed, the more her irritation grew. She huffed, folded her arms, and muttered something about entitlement, shooting looks around the cabin as if waiting for someone to agree. The flight attendant returned with her clipboard, trying to keep things professional. "Ma'am, your seat is confirmed as 5C. Please take your assigned seat so we can prepare for departure." Karen's voice sharpened like a blade. "I don't care what that says. I fly all the time. 2A is always mine! This man doesn't belong here!" A ripple of whispers ran through the cabin. Some passengers were clearly amused. Others were recording. Because, of course, when there's a Karen, someone always captures it for TikTok. I realized it was time to step in. "Ma'am," I said evenly, "I understand you're frustrated. But the boarding passes have been checked, and everything is in order. Let's avoid any delays." She leaned in, eyes blazing, her voice dripping with contempt. "You're probably just some random guy pretending he belongs in first class." That was the moment. The perfect setup. I straightened my jacket, cleared my throat, and gave her a polite smile. "Actually, ma'am, I'm part of the crew. I'm the pilot scheduled for this flight." You could have heard a pin drop. For one perfect second, the cabin went silent. Karen's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, her face cycling from smug to pale as the realization hit. The flight attendant's eyebrows shot up. "Oh," she whispered with a grin, "that explains why you were so calm." The other passengers started murmuring. A few stifling laughter, others shaking their heads at the absurdity of it all. Karen, desperate to regain control, said stiffly, "Well, that doesn't mean anything. I pay for first class. I should get 2A. I met her eyes with the same calm authority I used in the cockpit. "Ma'am, first-class seats are assigned before boarding. "You're welcome to take your seat in 5C. We need to keep the cabin clear for departure." She finally exhaled, her shoulders deflating as she turned toward row 5. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, shoving her bag under the seat with a loud thump. I leaned back in 2A, feeling the tension ease as the engines began to rumble. The irony wasn't lost on me. She demanded power and status, only to be humbled by someone she'd judged at a glance. And as we lifted off, I couldn't help but smile at the thought. Karen had no idea she was now sitting under the authority of the man flying her plane. A few passengers gave me knowing looks, the kind of shared grin that says, "We all just witnessed poetic justice." But little did they know, the show wasn't over. Because if there's one thing I've learned about Karens at 30,000 feet, it's that they don't give up easily. And this flight, it was just getting started. The cabin lights dimmed to a warm glow, and the engines hummed in a steady rhythm, that familiar lullaby of long-haul flights. Most passengers were already lost in their own worlds, headphones on, drinks in hand, or scrolling through glowing screens. For me, this flight was supposed to be quiet. A deadhead trip, a rare chance to rest before my next assignment. But apparently, Karen had a different itinerary in mind. The moment the seatbelt sign flicked off, I felt her eyes on me, a sharp glare cutting through the calm. At first, I thought she was just tired. But then she shot up from her seat like a spring-loaded trap. "Excuse me?" she barked, loud enough for half the cabin to hear. "I can't believe this. This man is in my seat and now he thinks he can just ignore me." I exhaled slowly. So much for rest. Keeping my tone even, I said, "Ma'am, as I explained earlier, you're seated in 5C. Everything's been verified. I'm a passenger today, following all procedures." Karen blinked, her face twisting as if I'd just told her gravity was optional. "Procedures? What procedures?" "You're in my seat! I demand someone do something about this." She began waving her hands dramatically until a flight attendant, the same one from earlier, cautiously approached. "Ma'am," the attendant said in her practiced calm, "as stated before, you're seated correctly in 5C. Please take your seat." Karen huffed, turning back toward me with her voice climbing another octave. "And you think just because you're whatever you are, you can sit there and act like you own the place? This is ridiculous." That was my cue. "Ma'am," I said quietly but firmly, "if this continues, the crew may have to handle the situation more formally. And just so we're clear, I'm a certified captain for this airline." The words rippled through the cabin like a spark through dry grass. Passengers leaned forward, whispering, some barely hiding their laughter. You could feel the collective thought pass through the air. "She's about to regret this." Karen froze mid-tantrum. Her face went from red to pale, then red again. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but nothing came out. For a brief moment, she looked genuinely lost. The woman who had spent the last half hour declaring her superiority suddenly realized she'd been harassing the very person responsible for flying her plane. Still, Karen wasn't the type to surrender quietly. She muttered under her breath about unfair treatment and no one respecting her anymore, but her energy had shifted. She kept making small scenes, snapping at attendants, sighing dramatically, and finding new reasons to complain. Drinks spilled. Napkins fluttered. Phones came out. By now, the meltdown had become an in-flight spectacle. And me? I sat back in 2A, sipping my drink and trying hard not to laugh. Honestly, this was better than anything on in-flight entertainment. It was Karen versus the pilot. Live and unscripted. And the audience loved it. She had completely misjudged the situation, thinking she could intimidate me. But the truth was, she'd just handed me the ultimate example of poetic justice. Then came the grand finale. The flight attendants rolled out the snack cart, and Karen, still fuming, decided to make her next stand. "I'll have the chocolate-covered almonds," she demanded. The attendant gave an apologetic smile. "I'm sorry, ma'am, we've just run out." Karen's jaw dropped. "This is unacceptable. How do you run out of first-class snacks? I always get the almonds." She waved her hands like a queen denied her throne. I took another sip of my drink and said nothing, just watched. Passengers giggled softly. Someone whispered, "She doesn't even realize who she's yelling at." And then, as if she hadn't humiliated herself enough, Karen turned on me again. You think you can just sit there all smug while the rest of us suffer? You're not even supposed to be here! I set my glass down, leaned slightly forward, and spoke in a voice that carried quiet authority. Ma'am, as I mentioned earlier, I am a captain for this airline. I may not be on duty, but I am still part of the crew. If you continue harassing staff or passengers, I'll have to involve the team formally. For a moment, the cabin was silent. That heavy, electric kind of silence when everyone knows something big just happened. Karen blinked, her face draining of color. She tried to scoff, but it came out as a squeak. You could almost see the realization settle in. She had gone from an entitled passenger to the cautionary tale of the flight. A few whispers rippled through the cabin. "Oh, wow. He's the pilot," one passenger murmured. Laughter followed, stifled but unmistakable. Phones came out again, but now no one was filming her tantrum. They were filming her defeat. Karen slumped back in her seat, arms crossed, muttering incoherently. The flight attendant gave me a subtle nod of thanks, and slowly, the cabin returned to peace. The air even felt lighter, as if Karen's storm cloud had finally drifted off. By the time we began our descent, she was silent. No complaints, no glares. Just quiet embarrassment. Passengers exchanged smiles. A few whispering playful nicknames. First Class Karen, Queen of 5C. And when the plane touched down, I packed my bag, stood, and gave a polite nod to the crew. Karen didn't meet my eyes. She just stared at the floor, probably replaying every word she'd said, realizing how completely she'd misjudged me. As I stepped off the plane, I couldn't help but smile. Sometimes justice doesn't come with handcuffs or a courtroom. Sometimes it comes in leather seats and boarding passes. The saga of First Class Karen was over, First Class restored, authority reaffirmed, and karma served at 30,000 feet. So, what a ride, right? If you enjoyed watching Karen's airborne meltdown and the sweet justice that followed, make sure to hit subscribe so you never miss another crazy story. Drop a comment below. Have you ever had a Karen moment on a flight? And don't forget to give this story a thumbs up and share it with your friends, because remember, sometimes the best seat in the house is 2A.